I am Games, and these are opinions. If you're not familiar with it, Wave Race Blue Storm might seem like a fairly innocuous game. Certainly not what comes to mind right away when you think about classic Nintendo launch titles. You might have been familiar with the franchise as a Nintendo fan in the late 90s, having encountered the well-liked Game Boy and Nintendo 64 titles, which of course were properly hyped in Nintendo Power magazine if nowhere else. But these more realistic sports series, which didn't rely on a cast of recognizable Nintendo characters, seemingly had the plug pulled on them when Nintendo realized that they could let the player just make their own personal avatar instead of choosing whichever forgettable regular named sportsman looked either cool or relatable enough to them, or just simply handled the way they liked. Personally, I have some affection for these games, having grown up with the excellent Tony Hawk's Pro Skater and 1080 Snowboarding on the N64 from Neversoft and Nintendo respectively, and realized that sports games can be unexpectedly excellent when great developers come at them with their own unique brand of design expertise. It is in exactly this regard that Wave Race is a noteworthy series, as the aesthetic and control scheme is significantly different enough from your boilerplate racing game that it can legitimately be said to offer a unique experience worthy of returning to even years later. Wave Race Blue Storm has some of the most technical controls I've ever had to learn to play a racing game with even basic competence, to such an extent that I happily went to the tutorial after embarrassing myself on the first level and learned the importance of pressing the stick backwards in order to make razor sharp turns. Once you get used to maneuvering the jet ski, you'll find yourself taking your eyes further away from it and onto the background, interpreting upcoming mega sharp turns far enough ahead of time to keep yourself on track. If you finish the tutorial and head over to free play to just ski around as fast as possible, do crazy tricks off of giant ramps, and pose a sexy girl on top of a jet ski, the game can be exhilarating and a lot of fun to just play, though the lack of music in this mode or any sense of urgency means that it gets old relatively quickly. I could see someone using this mode to just decompress or something as a comfy game, especially back at the time when it came out, but unfortunately Wave Race doesn't have any single mode which achieves a satisfying balance of urgency and excitement with the freedom to just have fun. When I think about racing games, I usually think about me and a friend or two racing against however many computers in a 4-level circuit in games like Mario Kart or F-Zero. But Wave Race doesn't have a mode like this. The only multiplayer mode is a disappointing one-on-one versus mode. In a racing game, it's most likely that whichever player has been playing the game longer and or developed better mastery over the controls is going to win every single time, which is likely to get boring or frustrating for one or both of the players. By inserting the computer characters, each player at least has a metric for how well they performed the stage in general, and can feel some satisfaction over not placing last even if they do lose to the other player. Even if one player is worse at the game, if neither is good enough to overcome the AI, then the worst player doesn't have to feel as bad about sucking. And if they're both better than the computer, then at least they can feel good about being good at the game. The only situation where a player is as likely to get bored and frustrated as they would competing one-on-one with one-sided results would be if they were consistently placing last while their friend was consistently placing first, in which case you should probably spend some time learning the game first. The only actual racing mode available in the game is an arcade-style competition mode, in which the player has to tally a certain number of points across a gauntlet of 4 levels in any order of their choosing. I would consider these competitions to be the bulk of the game, since you have to beat them in order to unlock 3 of the game's merely 8 completely distinct courses, and you watch an ending sequence after you beat them. Because of the fact that in the competitions you are required to constantly pass these buoys on whichever side their arrow indicates, these races are punishingly difficult unless you've developed a complete grasp over the controls and memorized some of the more complex level layouts. It's not so much a matter of the AI opponents being all that good, especially if you keep your ears out for the sound effect of your turbo gauge filling up and use them on every possible straightaway. The problem instead is just how badly you can utterly fuck yourself if you make even a single mistake. Going off course, crashing your ski and flying off, accidentally overturning and heading backwards, or going over ramps wrong are common occurrences until you know the map like the back of your hand. But easily the most insidious traps in the game are its many long peninsulas. If you crash into a long stretch of land that takes a while to get around, you might as well kiss your entire career run goodbye. I've had plenty of races where I was taken from first to last place after a single slip up late into the race and been left without enough points to continue the campaign in an instant. I quickly developed a habit of playing what I considered to be the hardest levels first on every attempt, just to know whether my career was going to be over right away instead of later. Once I was good enough to conquer normal mode more than once, I realized that the game at its best is absolutely exhilarating. When you're actually competing for the lead, avoiding any mistakes, doing tricks off the ramps, and posing on the front of your jet ski as you cross the finish line, it's a hair-raising thrill ride. Thanks to the point system and the fact that you only need to place in the top 3 to win, being just on the margin of victory or even struggling to place 6th over last can be a meaningful and intense scenario, as you might still receive enough points to go on. Unlocking the Arctic Bay is a satisfying moment, as is the cutscene for completing story mode. But then you head up to hard mode and are greeted by the same 5 levels you just conquered. To be fair, most of them are significantly altered to the point of being almost entirely new courses with the same assets, but you'll still be once again running up the wall of a steep learning curve to master even more difficult versions of levels you already spent a ton of time in. So say you get tired of losing competition runs immediately by crashing into debris on new levels you're not used to, and you want to practice the levels elsewhere. This is going to lead you over to time attack mode, which is the only other place that you can play each level exactly as it appears in competition mode. It's a good way to learn the course and build yourself up to a point where you're not running into shit, but the default times that they set up for you to beat are so easy that the only reason to return to each stage would be to try and edge even more time off of your own run, or just to get comfortable enough with the stage to play competition. If you find yourself tired of having to dodge those damn arrows, the closest thing you'll find to an open course that encourages you to just have fun with the controls while maintaining some sense of urgency is stunt mode. Here the courses are reimagined to be ramp-centric and require less precise turning, and all you have to do is rack up as many points as possible while still making it to each checkpoint before running out of time. This would probably be one of the most entertaining game modes if not for the fact that you're once again in competition with yourself, so there's not much drive to keep doing it unless you're so damn enamored with the game that you'll just keep beating your own times as an excuse to play more. I find it kind of bizarre that Wave Race Blue Storm doesn't contain any racing mode which allows you to play the courses in their regular forms without having to dodge the arrows, making every stage difficult to master at a high enough level to actually complete a whole competition run. Especially when the game locks what is comparatively a massive number of its stages behind the wall of beating the competition mode on 3 different difficulties. My best guess for why Nintendo went this route though is precisely because there were indeed so few stages, and that their focus was on the level of variety which those stages could present. At the time of the game's release, what critics mostly fixated on was the game's approach to water physics and dynamic weather conditions. Every time you play a competition, you're likely to have to do 1 or more stages in the rain or fog or with really tough waves, and in all stages you'll find that the water level subtly rises and lowers over the course of a race. Certain shortcuts and ramps will only be usable when they're at water level, and certain obstructions will only appear under certain circumstances. This dynamism is fascinating, but it also tends to encourage more low-risk play because of how difficult it can be to keep track of which shortcuts are currently available while also maintaining the already complex controls. In a sense, what I'm saying is that Wave Race Blue Storm is the kind of game that becomes more fun the better you get at playing it. And while you could say that's true of most games, this is the type that can be legitimately enthralling at a high enough level of play, but can also be utterly infuriating at any level below that. When I talked about Super Monkey Ball, I praised the uncompromising way that it invited players to a monstrously difficult challenge, and I admire Wave Race for also pushing players to the limit, but I think the game's approach to difficulty is significantly clumsier than Monkey Ball's. In that game, if you died and had any lives left, you could try your hand at the exact same challenge in a matter of seconds. No level takes more than a minute, and even if you lose all your lives, you'll most likely blast your way back to the spot you were stuck at in no time flat, and you can easily go practice the exact same challenge in practice mode until you master it. In Wave Race, you can be at the end of the 4th race of your championship run, hit a wall really hard, and then suffer the indignity of 15 seconds of getting back on course and madly trying to catch up with the crowd before it all goes out the window, and then you're back to practicing the course over and over again in time attack mode. Between getting to play 90 distinct short levels that you'd only lose out on if you were not good enough at certain screens to do them consistently, and 8 levels, which, while different depending on what mode and difficulty you're playing, can kill you out of a 15-minute campaign because you overturned one time on accident, I know which would make me rage quit faster. Let me not make out Wave Race to be a bad game by any stretch though. My frustrations with it aside, there should be a point at which anyone who cares enough to power through more than a couple afternoons of mastering the courses could play the most complex course in the worst weather conditions, noodle through every obstacle perfectly, performing tricks off of every ramp and ski stands on every straightaway, hopelessly dusting the computer AI in the process, and maybe even competing for the global high score on a course as recognized in the speedrunning community. At this level of play, the game is almost certainly immeasurably satisfying, considering how excited I got just from being able to even perform a trick during a race at all. Aesthetically, the game is stroked with sparks of brilliance. Obviously, the water effects, while dated, are nonetheless gripping in how fervently water is animated and displaced. Even better than time attack practice, the best way I found to learn my way through the courses was to ride in the wake of my fellow racers and try to match their movements. This is another reason that I wish I didn't have to start a competition just to play alongside other racers. Most of the characters are pretty much forgettable, but the fact that they put one of them in booty shorts meant I got to fully appreciate just how detailed the animation on these models gets in trying to make it look like they're convincingly controlling the jet ski. Excellent work, Nintendo. One of my favorite things about the game full stop is the menus, which have this cool water rushing texture and the unselected options submerged underwater. All of the status screens and menus are likewise satisfying, but nothing beats the awesomely aesthetic loading screens. These always got me excited to play a level, and they even let you mess around with the water physics while you wait. I really miss the more aesthetically obsessed Nintendo of this era, creating stylistic visuals that continue to look great even after their technology has dated. The soundtrack is a lot of fun, sometimes abundantly cheesy even when it's successful at creating a tense atmosphere with its overly straightforward attempts to seem badass, but other times legitimately captivating as the guitars dip into some almost shoegazy sonic textures and sugary tones. It's a little too obvious that the guitar is the only real instrument being played on the soundtrack and that it was probably made by one guy, but at least that guy perfectly knew how to capture the unique aesthetic of high-speed jet ski stunt racing through dangerous-ass obstacle courses, somehow. There is exactly one narrative element to the game, and it is that each racer also has a named coach who radios advice to them as you play. Mostly it just amounts to praising you for passing arrows on the correct side and chastising you for doing so on the wrong one. Though the one thing I did appreciate is how they will inform you at the start of each race what place you need to come in order to move to the next round. It was the one thing that lent the competition a sense of narrative stakes as an event that is actually happening for our character. But while these coaches have more personality than the silent racers, there is no more to them than what serves the gameplay directly. That's maybe the weirdest thing about Wave Race Blue Storm. I feel like this game stopped halfway between trying to be more grounded and sports game-esque than a typical Nintendo game, and going all out with the mayhem that arcade, snowmobile, and jet ski games usually generate their appeal with. I really don't think the kind of sports or racing fans who prize realism to any extent are going to be drawn to this brightly colored game full of Arctic killer whales, nor were extreme sports players, usually either focused on amassing the craziest chain combos possible on more freeform courses, or indulging the ever-increasing fixation the genre developed on mayhem simulation. It wants to gobble through your time with the intense difficulty of a tightly crafted arcade experience, but the wave effects end up being more impressive as a technical idea than as a gameplay enhancement when tracking their usefulness is so difficult, and the results are underwhelmingly tame for something that crosses the line way too far for fans of realistic sports to travel anyways. I give this game 12 out of 16 Gamecubes. At the end of the day, it's still a fun game when it's fun, and a thrilling one when you put some sweat and tears into it, and it's pleasant to look at and feels good to play, and that's all worth something if you decide to simply meet it on its own terms and accept what you get. As the third of the Gamecube's only 3 Japanese launch titles, titles, it's incredibly strange. The GameCube underperformed as a console overall in comparison to its rivals of the time or other generations of the company's consoles, especially on its Japanese launch, and it's not really hard to see why. Nintendo was banking on the overall construction quality of 3 games made relatively close to the chest instead of on mass market appeal. Every previous Nintendo console had launched with a Mario platformer, but this one launched with Luigi's Mansion, a game in a completely new and decidedly less player-driven or cathartic playstyle with much more of a niche appeal, because it was uniquely capable of showing off what the GameCube was uniquely capable of. If I had to say what that was, what Nintendo was trying to advertise with all 3 of these games, it's the precision of their controls. After a previous 3D console they designed with just a single joystick right before the DualShock revolutionized the entire future of controller design, they wanted to promote the incredible precision afforded by their new joystick, and the addition of a second one. Ironically, for some reason they decided to make the second stick almost unusably terrible. As I talked about in the Luigi's Mansion video, both the game's controls and the shape of the C-stick were altered in service of one another throughout development, but somehow what this led to was a game that was given a new control style to minimize reliance on the C-stick, while gamers stayed far away from the GameCube when they wanted to play twin-stick shooters over the console generation. Isn't this the opposite of what should have come from the collaboration of the game and console designers on Luigi's Mansion? Nintendo has never been especially interested in what consensus has been drawn amid fans or developers about what is the best way to handle basically any part of game development. As a result, they fail at following trends and meeting existing consumer demand. The only way that they succeed as a company is when they manage to create something so appealing that it generates demand for itself, such as the NES, Super Nintendo, Game Boy, Wii, DS, or Switch. When they make something that they can't convince anyone they want, they fail, like with the Virtual Boy, the Wii U, 3DS, GameCube, and arguably even the N64, though some of these are only failures by the metric of being compared to other Nintendo consoles. When Nintendo launched the GameCube, the selling point was that it was a technical step up from the N64 with precise controls that led to new possibilities in how games could be made unique or difficult. But that wasn't really such a great sell to anyone who wasn't dedicated exclusively to buying Nintendo consoles. There had already been 2 excellent next-gen consoles before the GameCube came out, and while the Dreamcast was an even bigger failure, the PS2 launched with its DualShock controllers way the hell earlier and already had Time Splitters, SSX, Rayman 2, Onimusha, Gauntlet Dark Legacy, Red Fraction, Dark Cloud, Twisted Metal Black, Devil May Cry, Final Fantasy X, and like 200 other games by the time the GameCube launched. Luigi's Mansion, Super Monkey Ball, and Wave Race Blue Storm are all excellent games which prove what the GameCube is capable of, but they all have weirdly niche appeal to be the only 3 games on a console for the first month of its lifespan. Luigi's Mansion is obviously the most normal and was the highest selling, but you were likely either going to beat it in a couple of sittings or give up when you realized it wasn't really your kind of game. Super Monkey Ball was likely relegated to a party game unless you were seriously dedicated to the challenge, and Wave Race doesn't even have the luxury of letting you throw a party with it before you're thrust into getting the hang of its complex controls. I can't say I'm surprised that the console was unsuccessful, but I'm also not surprised that it had a fervent cult following, and a library full of mine and many others' fondest memories of our lives as gamers. I would really like to continue covering the GameCube's library in as much depth as I have its 3 launch titles, just as I would also like to continue my series analyzing the Tales of franchise in depth. However, gaming videos are currently a side job for me, and I can't make any promises about my ability to always make time for them if there isn't any potential for it to eventually turn a profit or to grow fast enough that I always have reason to make time for it. If you want to see more videos diving into the history of niche titles, franchises, and consoles which haven't been covered in as much depth as other games have on YouTube, please help me to grow this channel by sharing my videos wherever you think people would appreciate seeing them, and subscribing to the channel to see more. If you also want to hear our voices for hours and hours and hours, we live stream on Twitch twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 6 p.m. EST, and we upload all of our past recordings to this channel where they are indexed in the playlists tab. We also sell goofy merch and run a Discord full of newbie game devs and make other shit, so check all that out while remembering to be the games you want to see. I am Games, signing out.